I will never forget that blue light cutting through my living room at 3:12 a.m. The house smelled of stale coffee and old paper. My hands trembled around a stack of unpaid bills. A being from another world materialized while I was drowning in debt and tears. "Stop asking," it said first. "Money does not come from outside. It comes from within." Its voice rang like liquid crystal. How could an otherworldly visitor understand my prayers and my collapse? What if the secret of abundance was never in the sky, but hidden in the frequencies of my own mind? I used to introduce myself as Matthew Ferreira, 52, an architect with plans in folders and empty pockets. I said it to anyone who asked, like a professional label that might still hold me together. The apartments I designed were full of light on paper and empty in reality. The phone on my kitchen counter buzzed with calls I couldn't return, polite threats, polite impatience, small frantic voices that wanted the money I no longer had. The room tasted of printer ink and a kind of thin defeat. My nights were rituals of worry. I would make coffee that tasted like warm ash and sit with spreadsheets until dawn. My hands learned the weight of each outstanding charge. My shoulders learned to carry the invisible load. I prayed I won't pretend otherwise. The words left my mouth as if they were an automatic mechanism, like turning a key in a lock that doesn't fit anymore. "Please, help me. Just one miracle." The words came out soft, thin. My chest stayed tight. The apartment kept its sounds. A clock that ticked too loudly, the neighbor's kettle at odd hours, the distant hum of traffic like a low ocean. There were physical facts I could name. 3 missed mortgage payments, a tax bill with a red stamp, my daughter Claire's tuition due next term. There was the letter on the table with the formal language of eviction: 30 days, remove your things. I remember the paper feeling heavier than its weight. The air tasted metallic. I walked the flat, counting what I had left. A chair, a lamp with a cracked shade, an old drafting table. I boxed photos to sell. The act of boxing felt like scoring out a part of myself. When I sat down on the threadbare couch, the cushion folded under my knees like the world folding in. I let the tears come, not loud, not dramatic, just wet tracks on my face and the absolute quiet that follows. At 3:12 a.m., the lights stuttered and a low hum filled the room. The sound was not a noise I could place. It vibrated my teeth. The temperature dropped, my breath left white ghosts in the air. My skin prickled, as if 1,000 small bubbles had burst under it. Then the blue light cut the room diagonally, as if a thin sheet of sky had been dragged through my living room. It was a clean, surgical color, neither cold nor warm, but precise. I remember the feeling in my chest, equal parts fear and something like recognition. I thought, either I have finally lost it, or I have stepped through a different kind of door. I did not run. My body was heavy with fatigue. My mind fluttered between denial and a strange, soft curiosity. The being formed in that light, tall and shimmering, its skin the color of moon metal, and its eyes like black wells with stars inside. It moved without footsteps, as if the floor itself hesitated to touch it. It spoke without moving its mouth. The sound was shaped, crystalline. "Stop asking," it said. The phrase fell into me like a seed into soil. Do not ask the outside for what the inside already knows. Those words felt like a denial of everything I'd been doing and, at the same time, like a possible map. I remember thinking of prayer like dialing a number on a dead phone. It had been my action, my belief. Now it seemed, in that instant, like I had been holding the phone upside down. My thoughts turned to Claire, 22, stubborn in her own gentle ways, more like me than I wanted to admit. I could see her in a small dorm room, her sketchbook open, her hands making lines she could not afford to trace. I imagined telling her I had failed us both. The image pressed against my throat. The being Kieran, it later told me its name, was touched my forehead with fingers that felt like cold light. The contact was nothing like pain. It was a small opening, a hollowing that let something in and out at the same time. Doors in my head I didn't know existed shifted. Names and images fluttered. Memories that had sat like thick dust in the corners of my mind stirred. I met my own doubt, face to face, and for the first time it felt less like shame and more like a symptom evidence of a habit gone wrong. Kieran showed me something that should have been ordinary. He made it visible. He took my prayers, the actual sounds, the texture of my voice, and made them into threads. They hung in the air like ribbons. Then he made my thoughts visible as well. They were much brighter, denser. My fear, my images of bills and empty rooms, pulsed like neon. He pointed to the difference. The words were thin, the images were loud. The world, he said quietly, responds to the loudest thing you put out. I had been shouting scarcity with my thoughts while whispering abundance with my mouth. I tried to argue. It is a reflexive thing, to defend what you have practiced for years. But my prayers, I said, they are all I have. Kieran looked at me with that soft intensity and said something that settled like an ancient fact. Prayer without feeling is an empty bell. The knell you sound is the knell you expect to hear answered. If you tune to lack, lack will answer. The air in the room seemed to fold inward when he said that. I felt that fold in my lungs. It was a hard note of truth. I wanted to hear a different arrangement of his sentence. I wanted a loophole, a small clerical error I could exploit. Kieran didn't offer loopholes. He offered experiments. 7 days, he said. I will not be the one to give you anything. You will stop asking. You will inhabit a feeling first. The challenge felt almost cruel. I had been living on the edge of survival. To ask me to stop asking was to ask me to put my hands in the fire and trust they would not burn. But there was a clarity in the instruction that stripped away complexity. Do not push outward. Change the quality of what you are. I left him in that room, his light sinking back into the corners, and I sat in the silence like someone who had been told how to breathe for the first time. The apartment hummed again in its familiar noises. The clock ticked. The kettle sang in the neighbor's flat. Outside, a dog barked, punctuating my new, impossible agreement. That morning, I tried. I did the exercise he laid out. 2 sessions a day, 15 minutes each, eyes closed, breath slow. The instruction was simple, but the real work was inside. Instead of visualizing money arriving, he told me to feel the state that money would create. Not the envelope with numbers, not the bank app's green numbers, but the body breathing without the tight band around the chest. The taste of food without calculation. Claire's laughter back in our kitchen. He told me to linger in that felt sense. It felt ridiculous. I am not a man who trusted softness easily. But I did it anyway. I sat, eyes closed, and let my body imagine the relief of paid bills like a heat spreading through the sternum. I allowed gratitude to echo like a small bell. I whispered sentences to myself. I am at ease. I am enough. The statements felt infantile at first. My mind pushed back with lists of reasons why not, to which I listened, and then returned to the breath. When I opened my eyes, there was a note 50 reis on the floor by the couch. I stared at it the way you stare at an old coin found in a coat. It might have been dropped by a passerby. It might have been the neighbor. But the timing, the immediacy between the exercise and that small, exact arrival felt like a wink. Not a solution. Not even a practical answer. A sign. It smelled faintly of fried food. I told Claire later that day. She was a mess of sketches and raw honesty. She looked at my hands like someone seeing a blueprint of a house in ruins and still loving the lines. Dad, she said, if this is a trick, I don't care. You look different. Lighter. I could have laughed at the silliness of that, but I felt it too. The posture in my shoulders shifted. My back, which had been the shape of worry, learned to release. Yet the world outside did not soften because I sat in a chair and renamed my feelings. The calls from creditors continued. The eviction notice still hung like a specter. Veronica, my ex-wife, appeared like a gust of cold wind 2 nights later. She arrived in clothes that still read as a public statement of order and gave a lecture shaped like concern. Her words were precise and painful. You can't live like this, she said. You need a job, a plan, a real solution. She put her hand on my draft table, and it felt like a verdict. He taught me to name the shame in my body where it lived behind the ribs, and to put a hand there and breathe into it. He taught me a loop, a short internal phrase to anchor the state when I faltered. I say it now sometimes when my chest tightens. I breathe abundance. I am open. The words feel like keys. He also offered a small experiment of visibility. He asked me to think of someone I had not heard from in years. I thought of Miguel, my old partner, sharp, quick, the kind of man who could make a building stand taller simply by making someone sign a paper. The thought had barely formed when my phone vibrated. Miguel, a text, saw a project online made me think of you. How are you? Coincidence, I told myself. But the rhythm of those little events that started to pile up, an unexpected client message, a returned email from a supplier, formed a pattern. Tiny answers arrived like breadcrumbs. I began to write small scripts for myself, short and practical. 15 minutes of practice in the morning, before the phone, gratitude for the things already present. A single small action each day toward work and email, a walk past a site, a call. The practice did not replace action. It reoriented my frame. The difference was subtle but decisive. The actions were done from a less frantic posture. A word about how to help if you are still listening. I am learning this with my voice raw. This channel is new. If these words move you, subscribing and sharing helps me reach a small goal, 1,000 people, so I can bring more stories like this. Tell me where you listen from in the comments. Your city, your country. It keeps me honest and connected. Veronica did not soften. She argued from the inside of practicality. She measured my new practice as denial. The friction with her tested the softness I was learning to hold. I wanted to retreat into her logic because it was clean, sharp, and historically true. But each time I chose to breathe instead of react, the knot in my sternum eased a little. There were nights I failed. I skipped a session and felt the old terror return like bad weather. There were mornings I could not find the felt sense at all. Doubt returned like fog. But the practice had taught me to notice the fog without panicking. I would sit, I would breathe, I would say my short loop. I breathe abundance. I am open. The sentence is not a magic incantation. It's an orientation. It reminds me which hand to take when panic approaches. Small signs kept coming. A former client sent a short note about a possible commission. A supplier returned a deposit. The rhythm felt like an accumulation of soft nudges. On the 6th day, after a full session where I allowed myself to feel the safety of paid bills so completely that my face warmed with quiet gratitude, I received the call that changed everything. A woman from the bank said, "We found an error in your contract." Her words sounded like a line being cut loose. There was a pause, then a description I barely understood, an interest rate misapplied, a clerical oversight, a credit that if the paperwork held would more than cover what I owed. When they told me the amount and that it would hit my account in 24 hours, my body did a curious thing. It wept and laughed at the same time. My laugh was the sound of someone realizing the ground under them had shifted. There was relief, yes, but there was also the strange, new sensation of being seen by a system that had seemed implacably bureaucratic. I had not demanded, I had changed. The money came not because I had asked the sky, but because something in my posture had changed the way the world operated on me. That night, with the account verified, I sat with Claire at the kitchen table and we ate something simple. The light was ordinary and perfect. We spoke about next steps, about rebuilding, about how small acts accumulate. I kept thinking there was no singular miracle, only a sequence of choices that had opened a channel. I had changed, yes, but so had my relationship to the world. I no longer saw money as a monster to be begged of a distant judge. I saw it as a current that could pass through me when my stone of fear was removed. The call from the bank was proof, but it was only proof to the part of me that needed evidence. The deeper change was the way my breath matched the room. I began to notice other stories around me. A neighbor who had learned to breathe before an interview and was offered a position. A small client who, after a change in posture, came back with a larger brief. I started to record them in a small notebook. Each was a mini phenomenology: attention, shift, small external sign. None were universal guarantees. All required responsibility and follow through. There is a paradox here I learned to live with. The practice asks for gentleness and rigor at the same time. You must be tender with your inner world and active in your outer one. You must not mistake feeling for action. The feeling prepares you. The action completes the birth. At the end of that week, Kieran came again. He did not glow as much. He leaned like a quiet lantern. "What did you learn?" he asked. I said, "I learned that asking like a plea keeps the world at a distance. I learned that feeling the end before the means is a kind of realignment. I learned to notice shame and to name it." I felt a small pride at the sentence, the way a child feels competent after tying a shoe. He put a small, cool object in my palm, a crystal the color of deep water. "Not a talisman," he said. "A reminder. You will forget sometimes. That is human. Let this be a touchstone." It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. He left with that same soft certainty. The air smelled faintly of ozone where he had stood, and I sat, watching the ordinary lights of my room with new attention. Mini cliffhanger. I promised myself the weeks ahead would be proof, not belief. The next test would be louder, more public, and it would ask for everything I had learned. It arrived sooner than I expected. The arrival felt like a clearance in the weather. The blue light came again, but this time I had learned to hold my breath without drowning. The room was quieter in a new way. Noise felt like something that could be shaped. When Kieran appeared, he stood a little more solidly than before, as if this time the threshold between us had been conditioned by my own quieter interior. "Now we move from perception to demonstration," he said, voice low and precise. It was not an order. It was an invitation that made the air around my ribs expand. He guided me through the ritual with hands that did not quite touch, but that left the sensation of contact. The practice deepened. Longer pauses, focus on muscular relaxation. The image seed one word that would become the anchor. For me, it was harbor. I fell into the feeling of harbor, of a safe place where boats come home and repair their hulls. I practiced the word until it vibrated in my sternum the way a tuning fork resonates in a table. Kieran asked for 3 demonstrations. "Small firsts," he said, to calibrate the system. The first was humble and very human. I had to ask nothing, only inhabit the harbor while sending a simple, precise action into the world, an email to a client I had not pitched to in months. The second asked for patient endurance. Write a proposal as if money existed already to do the work. The third was the one that made my palms sweat. Call the bank and do not plead, speak with the calm of someone who has already been taken care of. I started with the email. The fingers on my keyboard felt strange. They were used to typing panic and negotiation. I wrote differently. I sent the message with a posture of completion rather than lack. The reply arrived with curiosity. A meeting followed. The tone of the conversation was different. A client began to listen to me in a new register. The small changes layered. In the middle of the second demonstration, an old habit slammed into me. While drafting the proposal, my mind began to list obstacles, materials, deadlines, costs. The internal voice cataloged scarcity with meticulous accuracy. I felt the old knot in my chest tighten. I paused. I touched the base of my own throat and whispered the loop Kieran had taught me. I breathe abundance. I am open. The sentence was not a denial of reality. It was a reorientation. I completed the proposal as if the contract already existed. The third test felt, for a moment, like the cleanest possible insanity. I called the bank. My hand shook as if at the beginning of a performance. When they answered with that recorded voice, I paused and let the harbor take me. I spoke plainly and without need. The woman on the line did her script. At one point, she passed me to someone in the legal department. I felt a pressure in my chest that felt suspiciously like old fear. I breathed. The person on the other end said something I did not expect. "We found a clerical error." I laughed because it sounded like the right joke. I sat down on the floor, and the laughing turned into... It was that I no longer needed their approval to practice the inner work. That was a quiet revolution. Claire was different. Her eyes had softened into something like awe. She began to sketch again, drawing lines that suggested new kinds of structures, arches that opened rather than closed. She told me, late one evening, "Dad, do you remember when you used to teach me to think spaces as feelings?" She put her hand on my wrist like a seal. We were rebuilding more than a business. We were repairing a voice. The public stakes mounted when a small local paper picked up the bank story. I found myself interviewed, asked to explain something that still felt private. How do you explain a practice that begins as breath and becomes policy redress? I told the journalist what I could. The practice, the felt sense, the actions that followed. I left out Kieran's more luminous parts not because I was ashamed, but because there are moments when the ineffable must be translated into pragmatic language. I wanted the story to be useful to the skeptical reader, but there was a different kind of pushback. A former partner, Miguel, re-entered the scene. He was practical and charismatic, and he wanted a partner again. His timing was precise. The offer looked like a bridge back into old ways, back into forms of work that had once defined me. I felt attracted to the easy rhythm of familiarity. Miguel's voice was like a blueprint I could read without effort. But there is an ethical vector that had shifted inside me. I started to ask, what does it mean to build differently? To recapture not just profit, but well-being? Kieran's presence was less frequent as I leaned into autonomy. He came in glimpses, always at the edges, like a lighthouse appearing and vanishing. He would speak in paradoxes that lodged in my ribs. "You are not less because you are gentle," he told me. "You are not more because you command." Those short phrases became a grammar I used when doubt crowded in. I began to test the method beyond money. A client's employee had a chronic back issue. I suggested small changes in the workspace, practiced a few minutes of breath with the team before they began shifts, and watched their robustness return. A friend with insomnia altered his bedtime posture and reported weeks of deeper sleep. The practice was not a cure-all. It was a protocol of attention. It changed context. It reorganized resilience. These were the small, verifiable transformations that turned a private experiment into a set of practical tools. Still, the tension remained. Kieran had warned me that the social loop would test me. He said there would be ridicule and disbelief and invitations to return to old habits. He was right. Friends who had known me in a different narrative showed concern. Some accused me of spiritual vanity. I felt that old admission, the wish to be understood, pull at me. I found that the only antidote was transparency and steady action. Show what you do. Show that discipline matters. Change the pattern through repeated behavior. On the 40th day after he first appeared, I received a call that felt like the closing of a long arc. The bank issue had been resolved. The compensation had arrived and cleared. I sat in my chair and named the small emotions: bewilderment, grief for lost time, gratitude that was not impressed by spectacle but steady like a tide. I thought of Kieran's crystal in my palm and felt it as a reminder, not a crutch. Kieran returned for a final conversation. He did not appear in that blue flush. He simply moved into the room as if his body had been there all along. "What now?" he asked, not with impatience, but with a calm that made me feel like a student answering a final question. "What now?" I said, "is to practice the code, to talk about it without preaching, to hold the ritual and the spreadsheet with the same hands, to teach what I have learned by example, not dogma." My voice surprised me with its firmness. It had new timbre. He gave me a small instruction that felt like homework from a teacher who trusts you. Teach through use. Repair where you can. Make rooms that help people breathe. He placed his long fingers near my temple for a moment. "You will be tested by the world. Failings will happen. Use them as data. Invite others to experiment, and be ready to be mundane in your miracles." He left me a small blue crystal, the same one, I think, that had pulsed in my hand before. "It is not magic," he repeated. It is an instrument of attention. The crystal warmed to my touch. I put it on my desk where a shaft of morning sun touches it, and, for a moment, the surface held tiny galaxies. After he departed, I reorganized my office. I hung a small sign in the entryway. A single word, harbor, painted simply. It was not a slogan. It was a reminder to myself and to anyone who entered that the space was built for steady breath. I rewrote my contracts to include time for practice with clients, a clause that required a small session of centering before meetings. People laughed at first. Then they called back. They said they felt clearer. They stayed longer. Claire returned to school with a bursary that the bank compensated us for, not because anyone granted us charity, but because the money that came in allowed us to rearrange priorities. She started a small studio where she teaches drawing and presence to young students. She tells me, half joking, that her father is a proud, formerly disheveled architect turned breath coach. I laugh, and the sound is different now, healthier, unafraid. Veronica and I found a new balance. We talk about practical things, bills, student deadlines without the old spikes of shame. She still rolls her eyes at the crystal on my desk, but sometimes she sits in the chair by the window and breathes. You could say she is learning taste for the practice in increments. I do not expect conversion. I expect steadiness. There were nights I sat alone in the dark and felt the old fear press hard. In those nights I pressed the crystal in my palm and repeated a new loop, one that Kieran said was for action as much as being. I create. I hold. I release. The words have become a habit. They are not incantations. They are protocols. I began to teach others, quietly at first. A workshop in a community center. A small group of architects curious about designing for felt sense. A friend who runs a cafe and wanted to try a morning of centering before the rush. Each group gave me new evidence of the same principle. Steady feeling aligns behavior, and aligned behavior changes context. People ask if this is about luck, or psychology, or the placebo effect. I say yes to all and no to all. My claim is modest. Attention matters. The shape of my attention shapes the field around me. That field responds with coincidences, with changed opportunities, with fewer accidents. The world is not magic in a supernatural sense. It is responsive in a way that can be trained. There is one last scene I will keep with me. 6 months after the light in my living room first cut the air, I walked past the river near our city at dawn. The water was thin silver. Claire rode her bicycle and laughed at a thought she had. Veronica held a thermos and smiled without words. I stood on the bridge and felt the sun warm the crystal on my desk. I remembered the nights of despair and the sound of Kieran's voice like a bell in the dark. I did a very simple thing. I breathed fully, deeply, and let gratitude feel like a current through my arms. Mini cliffhanger, the work continues. Small emergencies will come, and my practice will be tested again. But now I hold a method and a language. I wonder, will you try it where you are? The air between us felt like glass, clear and cold. Kieran reached out, and the room filled with ribbons, not paper, but threads of light that hung like laundry frozen mid-air. They hummed faintly, a sound under the tick of my clock, and when I looked closer, I saw that each ribbon carried texture. The sound of my voice, the pace of my breath, the weight of the words. I could almost taste them, copper and salt, as if the ribbon had memory. He guided one toward me. It was my prayer, polite, low, the syllables of plea. The ribbon was thin and pale, like a whisper in moonlight. Then he pulled another, my thinking, and it blazed. Images of invoices, due dates, the late notices I'd kept folded in my drawer flared and bled color into the air. The image ribbons were thick, fluorescent, and they snapped louder, as if they carried more pressure. I felt it physically. My chest tightened, my breath shortened. The room smelled faintly of ozone. You are speaking 2 languages, Kieran said, voice without a mouth. The phrase arrived like a pebble dropping into still water. One is soft. One is loud. The world answers the loud one. His hands moved like someone reading a score. The sensation in my throat was equal parts humiliation and relief. If you inhabit enough of the end of relief, the safety, you change the channel of your life. I tested it the next morning because it was easier to do than to refuse the law I had just seen. I sat with my back against the drafting table, palms warm on my knees, breath counted. Kieran instructed me to find a single sensation, not an image of an envelope with money, not the numbers on a screen, but the small, domestic textures of being paid. The sound of the kettle when there is peace, Claire's laugh without strain, my footsteps lighter on the floor. I followed him into that felt room. The muscles at the base of my neck softened. My jaw unclenched. A tiny bell of gratitude sounded in my chest. When I opened my eyes, a coin lay by the couch. Not an answer, I told myself. Not an answer. The coin smelled faintly of oil from a food stall, and the timing made the hairs on my arm stand up. Miguel's message, the text asking how I was after years, arrived like punctuation. A small proof, and still I felt hungry for something more definitive. Kieran watched me with those dark, patient eyes. Small calibrations first, he said. Proofs stack. He let the sentence hang. Outside, a siren passed, and for the first time I measured my breath against it instead of against my fear. Mini cliffhanger. Kieran set a condition that felt like a dare: 7 days without asking. Only embodying, and the first experiments would not be private. The world would answer, it would also test. What form would that test take, and would my hands be steady enough to accept what came? The protocol was deliberately simple and strangely domestic. Twice a day, 15 minutes each, I would sit. Eyes closed, feet planted on the floor, hands resting where I could feel my pulse. I was to choose a single anchor word, not an image, but a feeling seed. Kieran gave me a syllable, harbor. He said it like someone describing a place he'd once seen from another coast. Harbor meant steadiness, the smell of wood, the sound of ropes, the way a boat settles after storm. I said it aloud once, testing the sound in my throat. It felt like placing a key on a table. Each session had choreography. Breathe in for 4, hold 2, exhale 6. Soften the jaw. Bring the attention to the belly. Repeat the anchor word with the breath, but do not ask. Do not plead. Hold the end as if you have already crossed the bridge. At the end of 10 minutes, stand and do one small practical act toward the problem. Send an email, make a call, walk to the site. The action was the hand that invited reality to meet the new posture. The first morning I followed every step. The apartment smelled of boiled water and old paper. My palms were warm. I let harbor settle like a pebble in the chest. For a moment my mind, an old, weathered clerk, filed complaints, deadlines, missed payments, the list. I observed them, like a neighbor walking past my window, and returned to the breath. When I opened my eyes, there was a small banknote by the couch, 50 reis. It was ridiculous and exact, and smelled faintly of frying oil. I laughed, because I did not know whether to cry. It was not a solution, but it was a knot of evidence. I kept the ritual, and the world kept returning tiny confirmations. A supplier I had written off answered my message within hours. A client who'd ghosted me sent a short, curious email. A neighbor told me she'd found a sketch I had left in a cafe and offered to buy it. Each event was small, tactile, a return message, a deposit notification, a knock at the door. Each came with a body reaction, a loosening behind the sternum, a small animal of relief exhaling through my shoulders. I also began to try the method elsewhere. At a rehearsal with a small team at a community center, I let a 5-minute harbor pause before a contractor meeting. The room, which had been fluorescent and taut with billing anxiety, softened. A man who'd been grinding his jaw for weeks exhaled audibly and later told me his back pain eased for the first time in days. A friend who managed a cafe asked if I could do a short session with his morning staff. They reported the rush hour felt less sharp, orders flowed with fewer mistakes. These were not miracles so much as rearrangements of tone. Each evening I recorded the tiny events in a notebook, like a scientist tracking small anomalies. The notes grew. Phone call at 11:14 Miguel. Supplier refund. Article request. Return deposit. The list felt like stitches. The practice did not replace my obligations. I still called creditors. I still drafted proposals. But the posture from which I acted had shifted. Where panic had once been the engine, steadiness became the starting place. I moved differently. The words I used to clients had a different cadence. The world responded differently to that cadence. At times I failed. One afternoon I forgot the session entirely and spent the hour on a spreadsheet. That night the old dread returned, sharp as hail. I sat, hands on my knees, and admitted the slip to myself. No theatrics, no self-flagellation. Then I breathed. The honesty rebalanced me. Kieran had said human systems would glitch. The task was to notice the break without moralizing it. Experiment, not performance, he said once, like a teacher who trusts the student's resilience. Mini cliffhanger. By day 6 the signs thickened into something that no longer felt coincidental. My chest knew an answer was forming. The final proof, public, procedural, and irrevocable, was approaching, and it would require me to speak differently to the institution that had almost taken my home. Veronica arrived in the late afternoon like winter. Her shoes clicked across my kitchen tiles and the apartment shrank around her certainty. She stood in the doorway, arms folded, a scent of formal linen and sharp perfume in the air. I told her about Kieran the way you might tell someone about a dream. Stumbling, apologetic, careful not to sound unmoored. She listened, as only someone who had once loved you enough to know your patterns can. You are being ridiculous, she said, crisp as a receipt. Her voice skimmed across the room and left a thin frost on the back of my neck. Meditation will not pay a mortgage. Aliens, or whatever this is, are not invoices. Her eyes landed on the coin on my table and then on my hands, which still smelled faintly of filter coffee. I felt my face heat, fingers spread on the wood as if to anchor myself. Shame rose like steam. The old script's failure, irresponsibility trailed through the sentences I had been trying to replace. I could have yielded. It would have been easy to fold into the narrative she offered, go get a job, sell the drafting table, apologize to everyone. Part of me wanted that clean route. But there was a different tenderness in my ribs now, the memory of harbor. I sat, inhaled, and let Veronica's voice pass through me without being the conductor. I'm not ignoring bills, I said quietly. I'm changing the place from which I act. The words sounded both naive and true. Her face softened for a breath, and then her armor reasserted itself. After she left, I tried to do the practice, but the shame clamped like a lid. My breath was shallow, the room too loud. I found my hands rubbing at the place behind my sternum where the old knots lived. Kieran materialized then, less luminous, like a night light on a bedside table. He did not chastise. He put a cool palm. Their pressure felt like wind on a window near my chest, and taught me to name the shape. Where does shame sit? He asked. I felt foolish, but I placed my hand on the exact spot and named it. Ash, small, hot. Naming it changed its density. It became something to breathe into, not a verdict. He gave me a short phrase to use in those moments, an action lozenge. I breathe abundance. I open the harbor. It was not meant to deny the truth of my bills, but to alter the tone I offered the world. I repeated it under my breath and felt the muscles at the base of my neck unclench. The voice in my head that cataloged failures still existed, of course, but an alternative record, a calmer narrator, began to grow. Later, when I called a supplier, I spoke from that lower note. The conversation felt different. The person on the other end responded with something that resembled cooperation. Resistance did not come only from Veronica. Friends who had known my ordinary narrative competent architect, steady hand, looked puzzled. A colleague laughed in a coffee shop when I mentioned doing breathing work before a client meeting. You and your rituals, he said, smiling thinly. Their laughter stung, but their distance also clarified who needed convincing and who simply observed. I learned the economics of disclosure. Tell the curious, show the results. Keep the practices simple and public enough to be tested. There were harder nights. The world would ask for evidence in the form of policy and procedure, a bank's legal department, a public ledger, a set of documents. I could feel the approach of that inevitable administrative moment. Would the practice hold when bureaucracy arrived with its dry voice and files? Would Harbor be enough to face a room of lawyers? I remember the morning like a held breath. The city was under a thin gray light that scraped the windows. I had just finished the 15-minute Harbor practice, the breath count. The anchor word held soft in my chest when my phone buzzed against the coffee table. The sound felt like a small stone dropped into a pond. My palms were still warm from the session. My chest was open in a way that surprised me. Mr. Ferreira? This is Daniela from Legal at Banco Central. The voice said, polite and measured. The syllables landed like ledger entries. For a second my body went to work in old ways. The neck tightened, the jaw clenched. I could almost feel the ledger in my throat. She read the facts like a clerk reading a sentence. An internal audit. A misapplied interest clause. 2 years of an incorrect rate. A calculation that, when rerun, reversed the direction of my debt. My fingers went numb. The apartment went quiet except for the distant hiss of traffic and the tick of the old kitchen clock. The world narrowed to the line of her voice. Because of the error, Daniela said, the bank will issue a compensation to your account. The value will post within 24 hours. I did not immediately collapse into celebration. Instead, a hollow opened in my chest and then gently filled. Air tasted like iron and citrus. I sat down on the drafting stool by the window and felt the wood under my thigh, a small anchor of reality. I breathed, the breathing slow and deliberate, the Harbor word like a small lamp. The feeling that had been practiced, relief, steadiness, the imagined hush of bills paid arrived in flesh. It was not an idea. It was a new musculature. I called Clara. Her voice on speakerphone was thin with hope and disbelief. Dad, she said. I remember how the light found a freckle at the corner of her nose. I told her what Daniela had said. The sound of her inhalation was like a small bell. We spoke practical things, a semester fee, a deposit, and then we stopped and simply existed in that soft permission that comes when danger withdraws. When the bank deposit hit the account the next morning, the numbers unhooked a weight I had carried for years. I watched the screen, the balance blooming like a slow sunrise. I wanted to make the moment clean, ritualized. I made coffee, held the mug as if it were a relic, and called my supplier. My voice was steadier than it had been in months. I negotiated, I made appointments, I set boundaries. The money did not feel like magic. It felt like room to breathe. The miracle, if that is the word people want, did not remove the need for work. I paid the overdue invoices. I called creditors and set realistic plans. I wrote the checks that mattered. But something had shifted, the tone from which I acted. Decisions that had been born of panic were now considered from Harbor. A supplier who had been curt for months softened and asked if I needed time. A client agreed to postpone a payment schedule rather than cancel the contract. The small human exchanges began to align with the larger number in the bank. Yet even in that relief, doubt crept back like a tide. I caught myself rehearsing old scripts. What if it was a clerical error reversed by chance? What if the bank corrected itself tomorrow? The old voice that once said, "You are lucky once," tried to reclaim its territory. I practiced naming the sensation in my chest. Ash, small, hot. I would whisper, remembering Kieran's instruction. Naming took the edge off. I breathed again. Kieran appeared that evening with the quiet of someone who had been watching a seed sprout. His light was softer than the first visit, like the blue in a shallow bowl of water. He did not appear to congratulate me. He watched me hold the mug and then asked, "What did you do when the number arrived?" "I kept my vows," I answered. "I did the practice. I acted. I didn't beg. I moved from the new posture." Saying it aloud sounded both arrogant and honest. He nodded once. "You changed the frequency that carries your life." The world had to respond. Now the work is to keep the field clear. I asked, because I needed the map yet again. What if the world proves me wrong next week? Or next month? What if this is a fluke? Kieran tilted his head. The room smelled faintly of ozone and boiled coffee. The field you hold is a new muscle, he said. Muscles fail and recover. Strength grows when you return after the slip, not when you avoid the fall. I slept that night with the balance of the account in my head like a soft tally, and a new loop forming in my mouth. I practiced it beneath my breath until it became a small pulse. I am the harbor. I am the harbor made human. I breathe abundance into the room. Mini cliffhanger. In the days that followed, the proof would not stop at numbers. The institution that almost took my home would call for a meeting, a room tiled with legalese and hollow chairs, and I would be required to bring not only documents, but the new voice I had learned to speak. The meeting was scheduled for midweek in a glass building that smelled of lemon cleaner and paper. The lobby had a soundtrack of heels on tile. I dressed in a shirt that was not too formal and not too casual. It felt like armor made of choice. My hands were unexpected calm as I held the envelope of bank statements and correspondence. The harbor exercise felt, in that moment, like a practiced pause before a performance. The difference was that I had no script to perform. I had a posture to inhabit. The lawyers sat like a small court. Their files made a soft rustle, like dry leaves. They were polite and efficient. Veronica sat stiff in the back, jaw set, the practical compass of her skepticism visible in the way she tapped a pen. I noticed the sound it made and how small it was, a marker of where she invested her power. I took a breath. I let harbor settle behind the sternum. I felt the ground under my feet. When they asked me to explain how the account balance had shifted, I had expected an explanation to sound like pleading or boast. Instead, I described what I had done. I spoke plainly. The practice, the posture, the decision to stop asking outside for what I could declare inside. I spoke of naming shame and letting the chest soften. I did not use grand metaphors. I used the language of furniture and receipts, of calls returned and conversations had. I offered them the numbers and the dates and the emails. There was a pause. One of the lawyers, younger than the others, asked if I had records, and I handed them the notebook where I had tracked the small events, the 50 notes, the supplier replies, the returned calls. The physicality of the notebook seemed to embarrass the room with its ordinariness. It was tactile, a thing you could close and put in a drawer. That concreteness softened the dry legal tone. People are less able to ignore what can be touched. When the lawyer from compliance read aloud the recalculation and the compensation entry, his voice loosened in a way that surprised me. He pushed his glasses up and said, "Well, that is a clear procedural correction." The words felt like a gate unlatching. My body let out a breath I'd been holding for months. The room exhaled with me, in small increments. After the meeting, reporters who somehow smelled blood in the water were waiting in the lobby. I was tired of being spectacle, tired of being the before and after image in someone else's column. I walked past them and felt the city air on my face. It smelled like motorcycles and baked bread. I called Kieran then, not out of need, but to anchor the experience into the practice. He answered with a silence that felt deliberate. "What do you feel now?" he asked. "Relieved," I said, "but also new responsibility. You will be asked to explain what cannot be explained by procedure," Kieran said. "You will be offered applause and derision. Remain the harbor. Teach by showing, not by shouting." He taught me an operable phrase for those moments when the world demanded proof. He gave it to me like a tool. Say this when you speak, and mean it with the body. I act from abundance. I offer steady hands. The cadence of the sentence felt like a hinge. I repeated it silently, and then aloud, and felt the echo in the chest like a bell tuned to lower pitch. In the evenings I practiced speaking differently. With clients I stopped the reflex to promise miracles. I described timelines and capacities, and then, before ending the sentence, I would anchor. I act from abundance. It changed the way contracts were written. It changed the tone of negotiations. People responded to the steadiness like sailors to a harbor light. Kieran's final teachings were minimal and practical. Words are maps, he said in that song. The practice required financial prudence as much as inner alignment. Kieran's last visit was brief. He placed the small blue crystal in my palm. It was cool and hummed faintly, like something remembering a song. Not a talisman, he said. A reminder. He looked across the table at me as if measuring the arc of a life. You were called because you asked. Now become the caller. I asked, not bravely but plainly. How do I teach without sounding like a prophet or a salesman? Show the work, he said. When people see the steady hands, they will ask the question. Begin by holding regular practice in public spaces. Offer your ritual as a steady seat at the table. Keep it small. Keep it accountable. I started to do exactly that. On Thursday mornings, I sat with a small group at the community center and led a 10-minute harbor pause before the design meeting. I did it at the cafe where I used to drink alone. People came and left on their schedules. No one signed up for allegiance. A contractor whose back usually flared after long shifts told me his pain eased after the pause. A barista said the rush hour felt less frantic. The results were small and specific. They were not miracles. They were testimonies of tone. Mini cliffhanger. The city would notice, in a way that had nothing to do with headlines and small contracts returned. In an email marked reconsidered, but a deeper test remained. Could I keep the harbor when Veronica asked, plainly, what I intended to do with this second chance? Veronica and I met at the old kitchen table, the one with a ring of water stains and a carved nick from when Clara was small. The light that afternoon fell like an image on the wall. She had brought practicality in the form of a folder. I had brought the crystal and a plan, a structured budget, a timeline to pay debts, a modest investment into a community design workshop I wanted to create. It felt both vulnerable and literate. I laid the documents out like a landscape. She listened. The initial tilt of her face was skeptical. Her hands folded into a position where she could measure my words. I could see the hard economics in her eyes, the years of caution that had kept her steady. For a moment I saw, inside her expression, the reflection of my former self. Then she said, softly, "If this works, teach me." That was the surrender I had not asked for. It felt like a small island rising. "I will," I said, "but not with promises. With practices. We will meet weekly. I'll show you what I do and what I change when I fail." We designed small, practical tasks. An emergency fund line. A monthly review. A commitment to speak differently about money in front of Clara. The plan turned the story into bricks. The harbor moved from mystical to municipal. Regular payments. A buffer. A simple ledger. The balance of the account. The paperwork from the bank. The emails to suppliers. These were not separate from the practice. They were its bones. Weeks became months. The crystal sat on my desk, a small blue punctuation mark that caught light at the same time each afternoon. People asked about it. I would say, "It's a reminder, not a miracle." I began to teach more openly. I held a class at the community center, 20 people, folding chairs, a whiteboard. I began the session with a 2-minute harbor pause. Then I spoke plainly about patterns, how a mind that habitually expects scarcity will shape behavior that reproduces scarcity. I taught the procedural part too, the breathing practice, the anchor words, the small post-session actions that invite reality to meet the new posture. 2 transformations stand in my memory. One was a woman named Rosa who ran a small bakery. She came to the class exhausted and ready to sell her oven. After a month of the practice, she told me her morning rush no longer resulted in mistakes, and a restaurant had started ordering her bread weekly. The other was Joao, a man who maintained public gardens. He spoke about a chronic pain in his hand that eased after he practiced harbor before work. The changes were not dramatic currency-laden miracles, but steady shifts. Customers who returned, a hand that gripped a shovel differently, a tone in the voice of a husband when he spoke to his children. I continued to keep a notebook. The entries were mundane and sacred at once: invoices paid, new clients, an email from a city planner interested in a community project. The ledger of life shifted. I still took responsibility. I still negotiated. I still made mistakes. When I failed, I paused and named the sensation. When I succeeded, I did not allow delight to transform into entitlement. Kieran's departure felt like the closing of a door that opens into a hallway I walked daily. He faded in that evening with a smile that was neither pity nor triumph. "You will be tempted to ask for twice as much and give half as much," he said. "Hold the center. Show the math and the breath. The future you seed will not belong to you alone." I asked him, quietly, "Will they come to believe it? Will they accept that I created this shift?" He looked at me as one might look at a tree and say, "The tree does not need you to name its shade. The shade arrives. Teach people how to plant." He left the crystal in my palm as a last instruction, not to worship it, but to use it as an anchor on mornings when the old fear hissed like a kettle. I learned to place the crystal in my pocket and carry an intention as one carries keys. The studio changed. We redesigned with intention. Windows that let light in at angles that lift moods. Waiting rooms with plants that were low maintenance but alive. Sketches that considered the rhythm of breath as much as the sweep of stairs. The work had a new quality, not spiritualized, but humanized. Clients came with problems and left with plans and a small practice to help them show up differently in their own lives. Clara thrived. She returned to college not because a miracle paid her tuition, but because the restructured payments and the small scholarship she applied for something she had nearly given up on aligned with the new cash flow. She began studying with a different patient ferocity. Watching her walk into her studio, always with a notebook under her arm, I felt the thread extend. I still smile when I hear the phrase, "I will pray for money," in a cafe or on a bus. I do not smile with superiority. I smile with recognition. I remember being there. I offer a small instruction instead of an argument. Breathe. Name the feeling. Do one practical thing. The work is not to replace faith with mechanics, but to invite the body to agree with the mind. My legacy, such as it is not a book or a formula. It is a set of practices and a studio that keeps time with breath. It is Clara learning to cultivate steadiness in her own way. It is neighbors who now close a morning meeting with a 30-second harbor pause, not because they believe in anything mystical, but because it makes the day gentler. When I walk the city now, I notice small changes like ripples: a contractor who hums while he works, a cafe that handles the rush with fewer raised voices. Those are small metrics. I do not claim universal proof. I offer verifiable differences. The economy continues its grind. Institutions still err and correct. People still balance budgets. But something else also moves: the tone between human and human. Kieran's final words hovered with me like a last constellatory instruction. "Give the method away," he said. "Do not charge the price of admission for the only medicine that works." Example. So I teach. I design rooms that help people breathe. I sit in community centers and lead 10-minute pauses. I keep a ledger and a practice. I fail and return. I remind myself and anyone who will listen, I am a harbor. I am steady. I enact abundance. Looping it into speech and flesh, I say it differently each morning. I breathe abundance into my hands. I open the harbor and walk into the day. I move as the steady bank of a wide river. Mini cliffhanger. As the crystal catches light on certain mornings, I feel a pulse on the horizon, an invitation to open a larger space, a place where the practice could become a public forum, a design school for steadiness. But to do that, I must first live the rhythm I propose, day by day, breath by breath. The months that followed felt like a slow tide rearranging the stones of my life. I walked the city with the crystal in my pocket, its cool edge like a small truth against my palm. Morning light found it at the same angle each day, and, for a moment, the whole room would hold its breath and glitter. The memory of that first blue flash sits beside the ordinary. The kettle's hiss, Clara's footsteps on the stair, the damp smell of the studio after a rain. Those details became proof as much it is showing up for the family you nearly lost to shame. I still keep the ledger. I still answer the difficult calls. I did not trade responsibility for some airy serenity. If anything, the practice sharpened my accountability. I learned to speak differently about money with Clara, to make plans that were visible and small. We built a modest buffer. We wrote a joint list of priorities. When a supplier moved a deadline, I didn't panic. I breathed and restructured, because structure was now part of the ritual. People ask me if I became a preacher overnight. They picture conversion scenes, pamphlets, a stage. That never appealed to me. Kieran never taught me to sell certainty. He taught me to show the work. So I did that. I met people in a community center with 12 folding chairs. We began with a 2-minute pause. We started with breath. Then we spoke about the ledger. We did small, verifiable things. An emergency line, a weekly account check, a modest investment into tools rather than whim. I would watch their bodies change during that 10 minutes, shoulders unlatching, palms warming, speech slowing. The changes were incremental. They were real. 2 stories live with me. Rosa, who runs a bakery on a narrow street, told me one morning that after 3 weeks of the pause, the rush hour mistakes had disappeared. She smiled when she said it, as if the small miracle were her own. Orders grew. A small restaurant began to commission her bread weekly, not because of a dramatic turnaround, but because steadiness made her more reliable than the next baker. And Joao, who tended the green strips along the avenue, began to hum while he worked. A hand that had tightened around a shovel for years relaxed. His pain, he told me, eased when he remembered to inhale before the first bend of the spine. These were not miracles written in capital letters. They were the slow architecture of life rebuilt. The ledger recorded failures as plainly as wins. I misread a projection and had to negotiate terms with a contractor. I forgot to follow up on a permit and learned the cost of small negligence. In those moments, I practiced the same pause I offered others. I named the mistake out loud to the notebook. I watched my body let go of the shame a notch at a time. Abundance became the tone I used to meet error. I let the work be the apology. That, more than any mantra, healed the pattern of avoidance. Kieran's lesson that the power is not extra to us, but through us settled into verbs I could use in the body. I adopted a set of short phrases, not slogans, but operating instructions. Morning, in the kitchen light, I would say quietly, I breathe abundance into my hands. I open the harbor and walk into the day. Later, when a negotiation tightened, I would place my hand over my sternum and murmur another. My hands are steady. I offer what I have and receive what is true. These were not promises to the world. They were recalibrations of my posture. I gave away the method the way Kieran asked, plainly. I taught a 10-minute practice at a cafe after the morning rush. I showed a contractor how to stand square before lifting heavy bricks. A school administrator asked me to lead a short pause before parent meetings. I did not charge for these moments. The work came as a trade, sometimes in pizza, sometimes in small donations, sometimes in the quiet satisfaction of someone saying, that was useful. People began to bring me small testimonies, not postcards of triumph, but messages about fewer arguments at dinner, about someone sleeping through the night, about a creditor who returned a call with a new tone. There is an ethical contour to this work I guard. Words matter. I learned to avoid grand guarantees. I learned to insist on prudence. Abundance cannot be an excuse for irresponsibility. So I kept the notebooks of numbers, of receipts, of promises I had made aloud and kept. I taught people to pair breath with balance sheets. The inner practice without the outer follow-through is a kind of vanity. The outer work without the inner tone is brittle. The two together create a small, living infrastructure. The crystal remains a tool, never an idol. Some mornings it hums faintly in my pocket. Mostly, it is a trigger. My hand finds it, and my chest remembers the fidelity of breathing. When I forget to be methodical, when pride sidles up, and I promise too much, the crystal's weight brings me back to measure. It asks for modesty. It asks for iteration. Sometimes, in the quiet hour, I still imagine Kieran's final look, neither pitying nor triumphant, and his last words, "Teach by example." That command sits beside a softer one, his parting scent of ozone, a reminder that whatever appeared miraculous invited ordinary discipline. The alien did not give me a shortcut. He rearranged my grammar. The city changed as my posture changed, not in headlines, but in small redundancies. The barista who took a breath before the rush, the contractor who scheduled a short pause before heavy lifting, the gardening crew that hummed while planting. Those echoes are my metrics now, not an empire, not even a movement, a web of steady hands. I keep a notebook of loops, short, first-person cycles that anchor me when the old fear rises. They are practical, and they are particular to my life. I speak them quietly, in different textures, so they do not become rote. I say, I breathe abundance into my hands. I open the harbor and walk into the day. Later I might say, I hold steadiness like a bridge. I cross to the next moment. Or, I meet responsibility with calm. I meet possibility with small steps. These loops live in my mouth and in my ribcage. If you are listening and you want an action, there are 3 small things I recommend, offered plainly. Sit for 2 minutes at dawn. Breathe slowly in 4 counts, out in 6. Notice one thing you will pay attention to today: an invoice, a call, a promise, and write it down. Then do that one thing. Repeat the ritual in the evening. Keep the ledger. That is the work. It is not glamorous. It is effective. Before I close, let me offer a small guided breath. Place your hand on your belly. Inhale. 4 counts. Hold 1. Exhale. 6 counts. Imagine, for the length of this breath, the relief of a debt paid in its simplest form, a small weight lifting. Keep breathing. Anchor the feeling of enough. There. When you open your eyes, make one practical note, a line in a notebook, a short call, a message sent. The world listens to bodies that align. I do not know whether what happened to me will happen to you in the same way. That was never the promise. What I offer is a practice, vessel and tool. It asks for patience, for spreadsheets, and for pauses, for humility, and for stubborn clarity. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this: practice steadiness as you would learn a craft. Show the work. Teach by example. The crystal catches the last light of evening now. Clara passes with her worn notebook. We exchange a look that is neither boastful nor fragile. There is work to do tomorrow. I tuck the crystal into my pocket and feel, as I always do, a small pulse of invitation, not the extravagant call of destiny, but the quieter one. Build, again, the small harbor. If you stayed to the end, thank you. If this story lands with you, leave a word below your city, your country, so I know where these quiet practices travel. Subscribe if you want these reports from the edge of ordinary work. Your support helps us reach the first 1,000. And one last question I carry for you, like a hinge. What would you steady today if you knew the harbor was already there, waiting?